What's good, YouTube? It's your boy, Blue Blood Sports TV, back at y'all with another one. So, former two-time welterweight world champion, superstar boxer, Showtime Shawn Porter, is not on the list for undefeated three-division world champion, former junior welterweight undisputed world champion, currently the WBO welterweight world champion, who is widely considered the number one pound-for-pound boxer in the world, superstar boxer, Terence "Bud" Crawford, who happens to be, Shawn Porter, happens to be Terence Crawford's mandatory challenger. He's number one in the WBO ranking system. So, he's the mandatory challenger for Terence "Bud" Crawford. But according to Bob Arum, legendary promoter, top-ranked CEO, promoter of Terence "Bud" Crawford, and Team Crawford, manager, trainer, Brian McIntyre of Terence Crawford, they don't see any value in Shawn Porter fight. This is aligned with what Bob Arum has been saying when he stated that Terence Crawford has no inkling, he has no interest in facing anybody other than undefeated unified WBC IBF welterweight world champion superstar boxer Earl of True Spence Jr. or 8 division former world champion, legendary iconic superstar boxer who currently holds the WBA welterweight world title, Manny Pac-Man Pacquiao. So Bob Arum, when he made the statements that he just can't sell Terence Crawford, he's just not a big draw. Ironically enough, he says that he lost more money on Terence Crawford in the last 3 fights prior to the Kell Brook fight. So much so that he could buy a mansion, he can build a mansion in Beverly Hills. So he doesn't think that Terence Crawford is a draw. But ironically enough, Terence "Bud" Crawford, Bob Arum and his team Crawford don't believe Shawn Porter is a draw. So essentially, Bob Arum look at it from this standpoint. If I put 2 guys together that aren't a draw, then what happens? I fail, right? They're not worth my investment because I'm not going to get anything back for my investment. So, Terence Crawford, let's just look at it. Over his last 5 fights, he fought at the welterweight division. 1 fight was important. That was the fight that he took on then WBO welterweight world champion Jeff Horn, who had defeated Pacquiao. In many people's eyes, he lost the fight. But Manny Pacquiao was on his way to exiting Top Rank and making his way over to the PBC, Premier Boxing Champions, with founder and advisor Al Heyman. And it seems like everybody knew this. And Manny Pacquiao didn't get the nod in a fight that he definitely should have got the nod in. With that said, he fought Jeff Horn, beat Jeff Horn, moving up to welterweight, first fight at welterweight. And that is a credible fight. He became the world champion, 3 divisions, beat Jeff Horn. But then he fought Jose Benavidez. It was somewhat of a rivalry. He got a pass for that fight because he was just making his debut in the welterweight division. So he fought Jose Benavidez and he stopped Jose Benavidez. Then the boxing world was calling for him to fight the upper echelon in the welterweight division, but he wasn't able to secure that fight, seemingly because Bob Arum stated that Danny Garcia, former 2-division world champion, former unified junior welterweight world champion, former WBC welterweight world champion, who just fought Earl of True Spence Jr. this past Saturday night and got dominated in that fight. But Bob Arum stated he wasn't worth negotiating for. And they sent him a lowball offer of $2 million, $3 million. He didn't accept that. But then they paid Amir King Khan, former multi-division world champion, superstar boxer, British boxer, $7 million. Nonetheless, he wasn't willing to negotiate for Shawn Porter at that point in time. He said he wasn't worth it. He wasn't willing to negotiate for Keith Thurman because he said he was inactive. Keith Thurman, undefeated at the time, unified WBC, WBA, welterweight world champion, superstar boxer. But Keith Thurman, to their defense, he wasn't active, and Keith Thurman had his sights set on Manny Pacquiao fighting, which he later got, but he lost his WBC title due to inactivity. So that left Errol Spence. Obviously, that fight didn't come to fruition, and Manny Pacquiao has been on the list for 7 years, going on 7 years now, and that fight hasn't been able to come to fruition. And Manny Pacquiao was signed to Top Rank, and they couldn't get the fight done. So with that said, they fought Amir Khan. Then they ended up fighting Egis Kavalauskas, undefeated at the time. He was Terence Crawford's WBO mandatory challenger. They went ahead and made the fight happen, and they cited that there wasn't no other options, so why not satisfy his mandatory challenge? Fast forward, Bob Arum stated they had a deal in place to face Manny Pacquiao for the November 14th date, but due to the Board of Health stepping in and the fight was going to take place overseas, I believe in Saudi Arabia, and they couldn't guarantee that fans would be allowed to attend live in person. So therefore, there wasn't going to be any closed circuits, any revenue, any gates to pay the massive purses for this high-profile fight, so it was pulled off the table, as they stated. Thus seeing him face off against former IBF welterweight world champion Special K, Kell Brook, British superstar boxer. But it doesn't truly seem like Manny Pacquiao agreed to that fight. But nonetheless, that's the route he chose to take. But if you focus on the Egis Kavalauskas fight, they faced off against him because there was no other options, and he was the mandatory. But yet they'll tell you that Shawn Porter brings nothing to the table. Shawn Porter is not a draw. Shawn Porter is not a legacy fight. Actually, if you look at the special Relentless on ESPN, Terence Crawford did with Andre S.O.G. Ward, Andre Ward asked him, if you rattle off 4 opponents you would face before you retire, who would they be? In order. He mentioned my first priority would be Manny Pacquiao because I've been chasing that fight since 2015. Actually, Bob Arum has been making mention of that fight as a possibility since 2014. But he says I've been chasing that fight since 2015. Then it would be Errol Spence fight. Then it would be Danny Garcia, who now, obviously, he already was scheduled to face Errol Spence. But Danny Garcia now has 3 losses, all to the upper echelon of the welterweight division. And kudos to Danny Garcia because he's been in the ring with almost everybody you could possibly think of. He has a great resume. He just came up short against Shawn Porter, Keith Thurman, and now Errol Spence. Big time against Errol Spence. But he says Danny Garcia. Then after Danny Garcia, he says Keith Thurman, then he will retire. Made no mention of Shawn Porter. As if Shawn Porter didn't even exist in the equation. Right? Continuously to bypass Shawn Porter. Shawn Porter has recently stated his number 1 priority now is Terence Crawford. He has the option to enforce the mandatory challenge spot, the WBO, and place himself in that fight. But he would much rather Terence Crawford just go to the negotiation table and negotiate the fight. Actually, Shawn Porter says he's so much so focused on Terence Crawford that when he was hitting a heavy bag in the dark, only thing on his mind was Terence Crawford. He says so the fans, the boxing pundits, are calling for this fight, and now it has started to manifest in his brain, in his mind, and he wants to fight. So he says that's the number 1 priority on his list because he's already shared the ring with Errol Spence Jr. He's his mandatory challenger. He's already shared the ring with Danny Garcia, Keith Thurman. So he says it's either Manny Pacquiao or Terence Crawford, and it doesn't seem like Manny Pacquiao has 0 interest in fighting Shawn Porter, never makes mention of Shawn Porter. So he says, my focus is on Terence Crawford. And oddly enough, when asked about this, Terence Crawford, Team Crawford, and Bob Arum, they have no interest in Shawn Porter. But what direction do they plan on going in? Because you see, 8 division world champion, former superstar, 8 division world champion, Manny Pac-Man Pacquiao, Filipino superstar boxer, Manny Pacquiao made no mention of Terence Crawford prior to Terence Crawford fight with Kell Brook, he didn't say congratulations or good luck on your fight. After the fight, he didn't congratulate Terence Crawford, and he didn't make any mention of Terence Crawford after Terence Crawford dominated Kell Brook and stopped him in the 4th round. He made zero mention, zero interest in Terence Crawford, mainly because Manny Pacquiao has no interest in negotiating with Bob Arum because his offer still has never changed. He's standing on the square. He wants $20 to $25 million. Bob Arum stated and confirmed that Manny Pacquiao indeed made $20 to $25 million for the Adrian Broner fight and the Keith Thurman fight. And Bob Arum also stated that he was overly joyed that Manny Pacquiao, Adrian Broner only did 400,000 pay-per-view buys, and that he wasn't responsible for having to pay Manny Pacquiao $20 to $25 million for a pay-per-view event that wasn't successful. So he confirmed this. Manny Pacquiao got $20 to $25 million for his last 2 fights with the PBC. Why would Manny Pacquiao miraculously, this is the number he was asking for before he left Top Rank to face Terence Crawford from the beginning. And Bob Arum says that he wasn't worth the pay. He says that he also blocked the fight because he didn't want to see Manny Pacquiao possibly get hurt as well. So he says he stood in between the fight and blocked the fight. Then Manny Pacquiao exited Top Rank and went to the PBC. But he got the money he was looking for. So he wasn't pricing himself out for the Terence Crawford fight. And his number obviously is still going to stand. Why would he lower his number to negotiate with Bob Arum and fight Terence Crawford when he could earn the same number, or if not more, to fight Errol Spence? So I don't believe that there was ever a deal in place for Manny Pacquiao to face off against Terence Crawford. I don't think that was ever on the table. I think this was a carrot that Bob Arum is dangling to keep Terence Crawford on board with Top Rank. So with that said, Manny Pacquiao, prior to Errol Spence, Danny Garcia fight, and his team let it be known that they have paying close attention and have an eye on this fight between Errol Spence and Danny Garcia. Then after the fight, Manny Pacquiao himself congratulated Errol Spence and said, congratulations and welcome back. Then his team, also known, let me make this clear, they did have a conversation, according to reports, with Terence Crawford. But they made it abundantly clear that they contacted Errol Spence's team, contacted probably more than likely Al Heyman, and let it be known that they have interest in fighting Errol Spence in 2021. Why wasn't this any mention? If the deal was already in place to face Terence Crawford for November 14th, why is there any reports of it? Why is there any talks or any inkling that this was a possibility? Because I don't believe that it was ever a possibility. I don't think it was on the table. And to hear Terence Crawford, he stated that they had a venue, they had a location, they had a date, they had everything in place except the money was almost there. He says was not quite there, but it was almost there. Well, we know the first rule in negotiations is going to be the money. And Manny Pacquiao's number has never changed. So if the money wasn't there, Manny Pacquiao never agreed. They never had a deal in place. With that said, Terence Crawford is stating that that's his number one priority. But it seems like Manny Pacquiao's number one priority is Errol Spence. So if Terence Crawford is not able to land the Manny Pacquiao fight, and Manny Pacquiao fights Errol Spence, then that removes both of his number one and number two priorities, focus, off the table. He says that when Keith Thurman asked for $10 million, he wasn't worth negotiating for. Right? Keith Thurman recently stated, the last time I made $2 million when PBC first started. So they paid Amir Khan $7 million, but not willing to negotiate Keith Thurman's original offer of $10 million. Not even entertain it, to negotiate it down to maybe $8 million. Right? So they didn't even entertain Keith Thurman. Yet, they're saying that, what's their options for Terence Crawford? Heavy is the head that bears the crown. Nobody wants to see Terence Crawford in fights that are mismatches. Kell Brook, the last time he fought at welterweight was 3.5 years ago when he was stopped by Errol Spence. Errol Spence broke his orbital bone, and he cited the reason why he lost to Errol Spence to begin with was the fact that he struggled to make 147 pounds. He then moved up to 54, didn't have any high-profile fights, and came back down to 47 to fight Terence Crawford, and his punch resistance seemed not to be there. Now, I'm one to believe that any point in time in Kell Brook's career, Terence Crawford would have beat him because styles make fights. But I'm just saying the relevancy of Kell Brook. So that was a mismatch, essentially. Everybody wants to see what's considered the best fighter in the world against at least 60-40 fights. Maybe not always 50-50 because the level of talent that Terence Crawford has may not be 50-50, but at least 60-40. Shawn Porter represents that. And Shawn Porter is your WBO mandatory challenge. And if you don't have any other options, why not Shawn Porter? And Shawn Porter, at this point in time, he stated that originally he never had any thoughts of fighting Terence Crawford because Terence Crawford started in lower weight classes. He says, but now the switch is flipped, and now Terence Crawford is my number one priority. Shawn Porter did 325,000 pay-per-view buys with Errol Spence Jr. Shawn Porter, they're saying that he's not a big draw, but Shawn Porter fought Famila, right, on free TV, and he did 1.2 million views. Terence Crawford fought a high-profile fight against a former world champion, a high-profile British boxer who's a superstar in the UK on free TV, and he only did 2 million free views. So Shawn Porter fought a less-known, less-profile fight against a guy that's relatively unknown to the boxing world, to obviously the casual fans on free TV, as Terence Crawford did. And Shawn Porter only did 800,000 less views with a guy nobody's ever heard of. And Terence Crawford only did 800,000 more views with a guy that has a whole country behind him and everybody's heard of. So it's safe to say that they're probably about on the same level of exposure. Not talent, but exposure. Their popularity is about on the same level. Because if you replace Famila with a formidable foe that people know, that has a whole country behind him, I'm sure that would make up for 800,000 views. So essentially, 1.2 million people tuned in to watch Shawn Porter because they didn't know who Famila was. And only 2 million people tuned in to watch two high-profile athletes, boxers, who are well-known, fight on free TV. And get this, they fought, Kell Brook and Terence Crawford fought on the biggest sporting platform in all the sports worldwide, on ESPN. Shawn Porter fought on Fox. Terence Crawford had college football directly pass him the baton because it overlapped. College football overlapped Terence Crawford fights. So it went right from college football, which is the biggest sport in the United States is football. That overlapped Terence Crawford fight. So it went right into, from football, right into Terence Crawford fight. So how come he only did 800,000 pay-per-view buys? If you give Shawn Porter the biggest sporting platform in the world and you give him a higher profile fight, it's safe to say that that will make up for the 800,000 views. So essentially, Shawn Porter carried the fight and showed his value and showed his worth when you compare it to that of Terence Crawford that only did 2 million views, both on free TV. So that's a telltale sign. What direction is going to be acceptable for Terence Crawford? Your Dana Ugas? The boxing world is not going to take too kind to that, and it's not going to be that acceptable when you have Shawn Porter out there. Who else is he going to fight? The answer is nobody. Now Terence Crawford is going to drop his worth and his value by fighting guys you never heard of, or making up guys that come up from junior welterweight to fight, like the winner Jose Ramirez-Josh Taylor fight. That seems going to be the option for Terence Bud Crawford. But you have Virgil Ortiz out there, undefeated Mexican rising superstar boxer, and you have Jerron Boots Ennis, undefeated American superstar boxer on the rise. Those are options. But let's see what's out there for Terence Crawford. The boxing world's not going to accept this, and his pound for pound status is going to drop as Errol Spence is putting on dazzling performances against high profile fights and fighting everybody for his legacy, and Terence Crawford is allowing him to do all the heavy lifting while he's fighting relatively unknown or mismatched fights for his career. It's not going to be possible to keep Terence Crawford at number one pound for pound if he fights a guy, one of the Jose Ramirez, Josh Taylor winner who coming up from junior welterweight, or he fights a guy that's relatively unknown. Once again, that's a mismatch. Instead of fighting, when you have the option of your WBO mandatory challenge in Shawn Porter, if Shawn Porter has to enforce the WBO mandatory position, that's going to speak volumes. And Terence Crawford's stock is going to drop, and so is his pound for pound rankings. But that's all I got for y'all. Drop a comment in the comment section. Let me know what y'all think. Y'all already know what it is. It's your boy Blue, Blue Blood Sports TV. Hate, like, comment, and subscribe. You haven't subscribed, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, hit the bell icon to get all the new notification. Follow me on Instagram at Blue Blood Sports TV, all one word. Y'all already know what it is. Shouts out to the entire LDBC. Shouts out to New Media. Shouts out to Black Media Row. Make sure you like and share these videos. That's all I got for y'all. Peace.